Welcome. I am Federica Gandolfo. I work for Venice Design Week. This is Bird Saskin. So she's our speaker today. She's going to give a talk on the influences that the Renaissance has on contemporary design. So right now she is giving this presentation. It will last about 40 minutes probably. I leave the floor to Camera, which is a contemporary designer and has a background in art history, so she knows what she's talking about.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here today. The title of this talk is Renaissance Reimagined, but it's exploring the resurgence of historical influences in current architecture and interior design. Particularly, I'm going to be looking at North America and Australia. So in recent years, particularly following the pandemic, I've observed a noteworthy trend in North American and Australian interior design and architecture. I've noticed a bit of a revival of Renaissance influences. Now, we know designers frequently draw on inspiration from historical styles, and we also know that elements of the Renaissance have been consistently reappearing throughout history of interior design. So today I'm noticing a subtle yet distinct resurgence of Italian Renaissance aesthetics, reflecting a renewed appreciation for the elegance and grandeur of this period. So to provide a little bit of historical context, today's discussion will explore key elements of architecture and interior design from approximately around 1400 to 1700. Well, I understand that this is maybe familiar to a lot of you. This is your home, your country, those of you who are Italian. So I really just appreciate your patience as I sort of delve back into this time period. So between the years of 1400 and 1700, there were profound shifts in how people lived, affecting various social classes. So for today's talk, I'm going to focus on opulent homes of wealthy Italians, particularly those in Florence and Venice, mostly because these are settings for which we have a lot of detailed records. We have no unchanged space that has just been left like behind a closed locked door that you'd still have a room perfectly as it once was. There's museums, of course, and a very strong indication and furniture that exists, and we can replicate what a space was, but there's been no space left untouched. What we do have, a lot of our insights are inventories from the time period. So a lot of you probably already know during the Renaissance, people kept very detailed inventories of everything they owned. So you can now find these inventories. So here's just two examples right here. You can find these in your archives. And they would list, go through room by room, saying this room has this many dishes and explaining them all through. So that is one way we can really look back to see how rooms and what was in each. Another very valuable source we have is our paintings of the era. So paintings often would depict biblical scenes, but if it is a biblical scene with more domesticity, so just say like the birth of the Virgin or the birth of John the Baptist, it would often be set in a more contemporary setting of the time. So here I've chosen Vittorio Carpaccio's, staying local. We have birth of the Virgin and then the Dream of St. Ursula. So biblical apocryphal scene, but you can see it is set very much in a contemporary home of the era. And this gives us very, very strong understanding of how domestic spaces were set up. So during this time, Italian architecture also experienced significant transformation. So wealthy families constructed grand palazzi, and here I just have an example of the Palazzo Strozzi in Florence, which I find is very interesting because about 1/3 of the family's entire wealth went into building the Palazzo Strozzi. And so what happened is where you had families making such a large expenditure on the architecture of their home, there then started to become a need for expenditure on the inside of the home. And this has really started to be a shift in looking at interior decoration for the first time and starting to try to have more objects within your home, well-crafted objects. So the Renaissance, we know, also introduced many domestic elements that we have today. So for instance, the concept of an individualized place setting emerged, necessitating the need for separate cutlery, a separate chair, separate dishes for each guest. Before it was more communal. Previously, rooms often served multiple functions, but during the Renaissance, there was a shift to creating specialized spaces. So having rooms be more for just one function at a time. Homes began to include distinct rooms that would be for hosting, so your salas, and which increased the need, therefore, for different domestic objects within those rooms. It saw a period of development for dedicated spaces such as offices, separate bedrooms like camerini, music rooms, receptions rooms of different sizes, and a growing emphasis on the function of luxury in domestic design. And then just as a little side note for Venice here too, which I find quite interesting, there's a particular focus on manipulating light within Venice. So if you have your, as you know, you have your piano nobile there, and in your piano nobile, often facing your canal, you have very large windows. This is just a contemporary floor plan that we have now, but it shows you the large protego, and you would have your windows that would reflect light in, and then it would also bring in, you'd have terrazzo floors, which would play with light as well. And then as you move into the 16th century, the protego would often have very large mirrors crafted in Murano, which would also have this really interesting play of light, which was really starting to take into account the sort of opulence of the time and beauty and that care of how your interiors were put together. So during this period, a new concept emerged that emphasized the role of decor and the expenditure of the home. So looking towards the inside of the home. And that concept was known as splendor, and it was coined by the humanist Giovanni Pontano in the 1490s. So here's a bust of him up here. It was inspired by classical writers such as Cicero, and it means to shine or to be bright. So splendor, and then it sort of had a sister term, magnificentia. They were often used together, but represented different aspects of grandeur. So magnificentia was associated with architectural magnificence, whereas splendor referred to the desirable quality of interior decoration. So really looking at this sort of focus back in on the interior. Pontano categorized objects for the splendid man, as he referred to, in two main categories. So the first category was furnishings and decorative objects that you could not live without. So that would be tables, chairs, beds. And the second category was decorative objects, such as paintings and tapestries, seals, divans, that sort of thing. This emphasis on splendor resulted in homes showcasing a diverse array of objects, each suited to specific rooms and crafted from various colors, textures, and materials. Interiors were also adorned with tapestries and wall hangings and paintings, glass and ceramics. Additionally, sometimes incense was used to enhance the ambience and aromas in a space to sort of connect back to nature. And this was particularly interesting in large cities, which maybe could be a bit smelly, to have this incense burning to sort of make you feel like you were in a more natural setting. The gleam and polish of these items were closely aligned with this classical notion of splendor. So the more you had ceramics that sort of gleamed, glass objects that gleamed, that brought us back to this idea of being very splendor, reflecting a dedication to both visual and sensory opulence. So I'm an interior stylist now, and I always look at this as sort of something very connected to what I do today. We also know that during the Renaissance, our furnishings underwent a significant evolution, where many items like trestle tables and chairs continue to serve multiple purposes. There were notable changes in styles. So sorry. It's okay. There were noticeable changes in styles and functionality. Trestle tables could be used for meals and display. So if a meal was happening, it would be moved off the wall, but otherwise it could be back against a wall and displayed with objects. Chairs evolved to have more varied forms at this time. And your beds transitioned from a platform bed to more models with legs. Long benches remained throughout, were quite common for seating, especially in your salas. But individual chairs and various styles became increasingly popular. And this period also saw more use of credenzas and cabinets that were then being used to store these increasing amounts of objects. So different rooms were furnished according to their functions. So now your rooms are really separate and they're being decorated for their functions. So the salas were typically featured sparse furnishings because they would often have a lot of people, but they would include tables, credenzas to display items, and the long carved wooden benches. In contrast, you had your camera, which some people think was just a bedroom, but it was more of a personal quarters. And you would sleep there, but you could also have small meals there or host small groups of guests. And these rooms often had a lot more furniture, and they would served as a showcase for your personal possessions. So some of your very special things you might have display within your camera. These rooms all contained a large bed, and they often had a lettuccio, as I have just a little example here, similar to a day bed. So, decorative items in Renaissance homes, we know included paintings, often integrated into paneling in the walls, and then later paintings, you would have portraits within your salas. Tapestries were common and could be moved between rooms. So just because things were like tapestries would be in one room doesn't mean that they always stayed in that room. They would be changed out with seasons. I have a quote from March 19th of 1557 by a Sperone, and he was writing to his daughter on a visit to home as he was coming home with a few guests. And he wrote to her, and I quote, "Make sure the house is set up as I wrote to you, with the Bassano hangings in the sala and downstairs, and with the tapestries in the camera." So unquote. So really showing that these items could be moved around a little bit. We also know that fabrics played a significant role in home decoration. Wealthy families sought luxurious materials like silks and damasks and brocades and taffetas, and these would cover walls and just enhance the interiors. Here, it's a little hard to see with the lighting, but this is a Venus attributed to Lambert Sustris. It is a very ornate bedding. Bedding would have also been listed in the inventories I mentioned before. It has a really huge tassel. You can't really see it here, but there's a large fabric drapery piece here, and sorry with the lighting you can't see, but there's a tapestry on the wall back here. There's a beautiful rug, and just showing the sort of fabric materials and the wealth of those. This was my joke for those of you who are a Monty Python fan, maybe. So moving ahead, as we know, the Renaissance also had a fascination with antiquity, and this was extended into domestic spaces as well. Collections of antique items, such as busts and small bronze sculptures, were often displayed. And so here I have this Lorenzo Lotto portrait of Andrea Odoni. He's displayed with a few classical sculptures. Some of these were known to be within his possession, so he's been displayed with his own personal possession, and some of them were Lorenzo Lotto's from his workshop. Now, another aspect that you would see where the classical is often uses of like friezes, classical sort of themes and stories in a frieze throughout a home. This would often be on fireplaces, carved into fireplaces. This fresco here is Ghirlandaio, is in the Tornabuoni Chapel in Florence. And you can see this, again, we have a biblical subject being the birth of the Virgin, but it's set within a contemporary setting at the time and a domestic space. So we can see how the room was laid out with this emphasis on the classical frieze. We have the stucco pillars. We have our coppered archway ceiling back here. The brocade on her dress is really quite something. You can't really see it at this moment. So now that sort of ends my sort of historical part, and I would like to explore elements from Renaissance interiors and how they're influencing contemporary design in North America and Australia. And this is bringing this idea of out of context, where in North America and Australia we're currently having this resurgence. It's out of the time frame of the Renaissance, and it's obviously out of the time frame of Italy and the area, Europe around it. So we'll start by examining materials commonly used in the Renaissance and Renaissance interiors. So floors were typically finished with polished brick, ceramic tiles, ceramic tiles, or terrazzo or marble. Walls were often plastered with lime wash and stucco, and they were adorned, as we mentioned earlier, with tapestries and fabric colorings. Ceilings might feature coffered or beam ceilings, and intricate stucco decoration. So today, I'm noticing within North America, many of these Renaissance materials are experiencing a revival. There's a growing trend to replace traditional drywall. So in North America, it's drywall. Almost all our walls are drywall. But lately, there's a huge trend for plaster and lime wash. It's such a big trend. It's very hard. We don't have the skilled trades that you probably have here. So even finding someone in the trades to do a lime wash or a plaster work is a bit on the trickier side. We see here there's the room on the left is a home in Toronto. It is lime wash walls there. This is a home in California on the right. Again, it's a new home, but it still has a sort of beam ceiling effect, which is not normal, typical. And the tiles, it's hard to see here as well, but the tiles are a brick tile, and it's throughout. Something that in North America has been a lot of wood flooring along the main floor, and you would use tiles sometimes in your entryway, in bathrooms. Even in the past couple of years, they're not using tiles so much in kitchens. Kitchens would be the wood floor throughout, and now you're starting to see, I'm noticing more and more tiles throughout a main floor living space. And I'm starting to see more and more use of this brick tile and marble tiles. So sticking with the marble tile trend, a popular pattern, extremely popular pattern in North America is this checkerboard pattern, which you can just look down at your feet right now, and it is here, it is everywhere you go here. And not so much the case in North America. So here I just have an example of San Lorenzo in Florence, finished in the 15th century, and the Ferrari. Now I know these floors date before even the Renaissance, but the Ferrari was consecrated in 1492. You cannot look at most designers I know and follow in North America and Australia are using this floor pattern in marble. Here we have two homes in New York City using the checkerboard floor. Here is a home on the left in Austin, Texas. Also this arch, very reminiscent of Renaissance times, but you can see the checkered tile throughout. This is an interesting one too. It's sticking with the terracotta color that we have here, but it's individualized ceramic tiles that are then made into this larger checkerboard pattern. From tiles, we can move on to tapestries. And so noted sort of throughout the Renaissance, Francesco Sansovino, son of beloved Jacopo here, he in 1581 noted about tapestries. He said, the walls were, according to the season, decorated with tapestries from the Low Countries and sumptuous hangings of brocade and damask. So that's the end of that quote. But tapestries in the Renaissance often displayed verdant foliage and pastoral scenes, and they were all often very connected to nature. And today, tapestries are making a huge resurgence in design. Many contemporary examples draw inspiration from Renaissance tapestries, sticking with this natural and floral motif. So here we have foliage. This is a home in Australia. We have another home in New York City. They both are depicting foliage. Here, again, this one on the left is work by Colin King. He has this large swooping drapery. It actually reminds me of that Venus slide I showed you earlier with this large swooping tapestry. This is a tapestry, again, with foliage. Here is another pastoral scene. Also, this one is in Australia. Moving along from tapestries, we can talk just a little bit about architectural features. Arches obviously have been a staple of classical architecture and a hallmark of Renaissance design, and they've been used throughout in North America throughout the years. But there's just a huge, huge drive of arches now in all our doorways, which used to be very rectangular. All designers and architects are almost all using an arch. Here, just as a quick Renaissance example, we have Jacopo Sansovino, your Marciana Library here, and then Brunelleschi, interior of Santo Spirito in Florence, showing sort of interior arches. And then this is two examples now within North America. This is Montana LaBelle. She is a Toronto interior designer. This is a project she's working on in Brooklyn, but just within this interior doorway, she's having interior arches. Here is another actual Toronto designer. This is actually a rendering, but again, you have this use of the arch, and then you can look at the floor again in this checkerboard pattern. Moving on from arches, I would like to talk about fireplaces. So stone-mantled fireplaces, especially made out of marble, is very much trending in North America. Although they may not often directly reference the Renaissance, as those fireplaces were often carved with more classical scenes. These fireplaces do recall sort of various European historical styles. Actually, many designers are having fireplace mantles shipped from Europe and incorporated into North American homes. They still have a bit of a classical association here. This one is a little hard to see, but has the dentils carved into it, and this one is even more ornately carved as well. They're both marble. And I predict we'll probably start seeing a bit more ornamentation within fireplace mantles in the next little bit. From fireplaces, I'd like to move on to furniture. So in recent design trends, Renaissance influences are a little less pronounced in furniture, with a focus instead of, as I said, the architectural elements and lime wash. That is very, very noticeable. But one thing I am noticing with furniture is occasional chairs in rooms, wooden occasional chairs, that have a historical character feeling to them. And they're becoming more prevalent. Here we have a scabello, it's called the scabello chair, and it is in the Met, and it dates to the late 1400s. And this is in the Met, so it's three legs carved. And then what I'm seeing in North America a lot is then having these sort of carved older chairs. Here, this is actually a birthing stool, and it would date later, but that same sort of feeling of, in a very contemporary setting with very contemporary furniture, having this one piece to really anchor back to more of a historical time. In this slide, this chair is actually British, but it dates to the 16th century. And you can see sort of that carved wood, the three legs. And then looking to the slide on your left, you have a very, very similar chair with the turned carved wood, dark walnut, just set within a contemporary setting. Starting to notice that a little bit more and more. Looking back to sort of our paintings as a point of reference. Here we have a Fra Filippo Lippi. We have, obviously, religious subject matter again. Once again, also set within a contemporary setting. I'm just looking back at this bed. So it's still a platform bed, but you can see the sort of the pillow and tuck back there. And then, of course, the famous Arnolfini wedding portrait, large canopy bed with this simple pillowed and tucked. Now, this isn't that new for bedding, but I will say, like in the past so many years, beddings have been large duvets, big white fluffy duvets and pillows. And there definitely is coming back to this more of this like tucked pillow. I mean, it was very prevalent in the 60s in motels and that sort of thing as well. But starting to see that come back now. This is the room on the left is a room style, well, this is Colin King working with the design brand Roman & Williams. And I'm not sure if this is something he styled himself. It looks like it was the area they were shooting. It's sort of unclear. But either way, if he styled this himself or if it was in the space where they were doing the photo shoot, it has clearly influenced him in his own design with his own bedroom, as he has sort of these oxblood walls, which I find reminiscent of a lot of these dark, dark red beds, and the simple pillow top. We also have this sort of historical looking portrait, too, within the room. So moving on to decor, and here's just a few other simple bed tucks, especially the one on the left, really looking at that brocade starting to sneak its way back into to interiors. So moving on to decor, historians often rely on paintings for insights into the display and arrangements of objects. So let's look back at this Vittorio Carpaccio in a little bit more detail. So we have the birth of the Virgin here, but what I want you to look at is more of the objects that are displayed. You can see we have a variety of different vessels, the candle back here, and we have our checkerboard floor, but I like looking back into this kitchen and this space and seeing all the plates on display. There's a real focus in the Renaissance to display your objects, and they were well crafted and well made and treasured and prized, and you would display those. Same with it's harder to see where it's so dark, but in the Dream of St. Ursula, there are also her items on display here within the camera. And then if we go on to here, we have this Antonello da Messina, St. Jerome in the Study. This is a completely fictional interior space. It's really quite fantastical when you look at all these arches of what it came up with. But it is an office, and again, you're seeing the vessels of various types made of various materials in his study. And then this is a fresco, an Annunciation. So again, religious scenes set within a contemporary domestic space. Often scenes, these ones with the Virgin are the ones that often are in a domestic space. Here you see the simple bed back there, but really looking at all of these objects. You have these various vessels. You have this sort of lamp, hourglass. This vase here is actually, it's hard to see, but they can almost trace it to vases, contemporary vases at the time. It has a quite a beautiful pattern on it when you can see it more up close. So all of these paintings display the importance of vessels, whether they be glass or ceramic or metal. Glass vessels and ceramics have also been very popular throughout the years, and especially now within interior styling. Ceramics, especially amphora-style ceramics, have been popular in recent interior styling. So here in the image on the left, we have this giant amphora. Also, even just looking at this candle in the simple display, I find it kind of harkens back to that similar images of the Carpaccio that we looked at as well. Excuse me. In the past few years, I've also noticed a growing preference for stylists to use glass containers that capture light. So here, just in the slide on the left, you can see on this coffee table these three varying glass containers, often holding water in them as they really capture the light. And as we know throughout the Renaissance too, you would often have, if you had the Virgin, you would have vessels, glass vessels too, because it referred to her back and forth as being a vessel as well as having the vessel there. You can read into as much iconography as you like with that. Just going back to this slide again, wanting just to talk a little bit about painting. So family portraits were once a staple of the Renaissance, and they would often be in salas and porticos. And we have seen a resurgence. Oh, my God. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much.
Sorry.
No, it's, thank you very, very much. Sorry, I had a cold. It was quite a while ago. It was 3 weeks ago, but I have this ongoing cough that I was hoping would be fully gone by now. I'm just finding my spot. So portraits would often be, as I said, in salas and porticos. And then we're seeing sort of a resurgence in North America of having these older style paintings. Now this actually really is a Renaissance painting. It's in New York City. It's set in contemporary. This wall is actually quite interesting. It's a cork wall. So you're having this very historical work of art set in amongst a contemporary setting. Here we have an older style, somewhat portrait as well. Also, this is a carpet, but again, we're having that checkerboard flooring pattern coming back in and just harkening back to a different past. Okay, and then similarly, what I'm seeing right now is marble busts and bronze bronze sculptures being on display. Marble busts especially, lots of little replicas. I'm finding a lot in North America, you will find, a marble bust of a Venus with half her head missing. You can put a planter in it and grow plants out of it. Here they're being a little cheeky with her bust here with the scarf. We have this little bronze statue on this coffee table. Again, just looking back at this older historic style portrait. Also in the room. Again, we have a bronze bust here. And then this is an advertisement for Nordic knots. But what I find is really interesting is this whole idea of display of your items from your antique sculptures. Where it's an advertisement, it sort of, feels like it tells us it's going to be harkening what's going to be coming in the future down the line and sort of more general mass interior design. Also note the terrazzo floor. Okay. And then moving on, I find Renaissance art itself seems to be offering a new inspiration for some interior stylists and interior products. So with the medium of photography, renowned American interior stylist Colin King, he has been utilizing chiaroscuro and dramatic lighting quite a bit in his work. And I find it very reminiscent of Caravaggio. So here, this is his work that he has been doing with Roman & Williams, a design brand, and displaying a lot of sort of their cutlery, dishes, their goods. But this is a work and ad he's been working on with them. So it's showing the dining pieces, and here too, it's to sell the utensils. But it mixed with this, with the fish and the dramatic lighting and the intense drapery folds. Here's the very dramatic and chiaroscuro effect. Drapery folds again. Very reminiscent of Dutch still lifes, and I also find very reminiscent of Caravaggio with the use of the dark and light and with the use of the drapery folds. Just when I toggle between the two, you can really sort of see that influence coming through. So just having that very, very clear connection. Moving on to, this is also his work with Roman Williams. This is just shots that he took of their work on set. But here we have replica of Renaissance paintings. And here, I'm assuming we're shooting somewhere within Italy or somewhere quite historic. Just looking at this checkerboard floor, looking at the little putti sculptures, really bringing in effect how this era is such a strong influence and where these are advertisements. I feel these are going to start coming forward more and more within general interior design in the next few years. Okay, so this sort of brings us to the part where I want to talk about predictions for what is next in the evolution of Renaissance within today's interiors. So, looking forward, looking ahead, anticipate a growing interest in Renaissance-era fabrics, such as silks and damast. I know they've sort of remained here, but in North America there hasn't been as much use in the past few years of silks and brocades and damasks. One thing we often know is that fashion trends predict what will be happening within interior design trends. So this is, on the left, Max Mara's recent resort collection. It was actually, the fashion show was here in Venice in the Doge's Palace. And the model there is wearing brocade. And then I have this Moroni portrait here of this young girl. And it's actually a very similar brocade and pattern. So, and I think it's very speaking where Max Mara has chosen to have this fabric utilized throughout their collection while showcasing in Venice, really showing that sort of connection together. It's quite interesting. Here's another, it's hard to see, but the model on the left is also wearing a heavy brocaded outfit. And then notable figures like Athena Calderon of I Swoon. She has been using fabric and brocaded fabrics on walls. She had a whole post about how it's so hard to find this fabric. You can't see, but it is the fabric, and then it is on the wall behind her. And she is quite a trend maker, so I have a feeling that this will be coming forward again too. Continuing with Athena Calderon again, this is her work with Jeremiah Brandt, the brocaded chairs, which, as I was saying, we don't really see that much brocade in North America. And then this is Tan France from Furai. And this is a wallpaper, but I find it's very, very reminiscent of silk. And then, of course, he has a pastoral or a tapestry with foliage. And then one prediction I do see forthcoming too is a greater use of lace. Haven't really seen lace used in interiors for a while, but I have a feeling that's going to start making a comeback. I know lace with Burano being here is very important to the city and to Italy, but this whole light fixture is covered in lace. Moving ahead again too, there has not been much crown molding in North America for the past few years. Things have been very minimalist and contemporary, and they're starting to see crown molding coming back again, especially with somewhat stucco details. So this is again is Toronto designer Montana Labelle. This is on that same house in Brooklyn. You can see her plans for crown molding. Here we see stucco and crown molding in this house in New York City. And then also additionally drapery. So once overshadowed by very sleek blinds in North America, was very, very sleek blinds, and then even moving just to sheers for a little while. But I'm starting to see this love of fabric and more intense drapery coming through, and I think we're going to start having more brocades, damasks come through in drapery. And another prediction I have too would be dark woods. There's been such an overwhelming amount in North America of white oak, and I have a feeling the pendulum's now going to switch the other way and come to more dark woods and walnuts. And then I've also noticed that some designers are starting to mimic sort of stonework in Renaissance buildings. So we have Michelangelo's Laurentian Library in Florence, and it has all this lovely creation of Serena detailing the architectural elements. And then again, too, this is Toronto designer Montana Labelle. She has using, and with paint, like almost the exact same tone to highlight sort of her baseboards and door features. Again, she has lime washed walls, and we have the use of the tapestry here as well. So this sort of brings me coming closer to conclusion, just sort of why are we having this sort of Renaissance resurgence now within North America? And the resurgence of Renaissance-inspired interior design can be attributed to several factors, which I believe are interrelated, reflective of our current cultural moment. So the big one that we're also sick of hearing about is the pandemic and travel restrictions. But I do think it's probably had some of the most significant impact on this The pandemic, we all know, significantly impacted how we engage with global culture, with international travel being restricted. Many have found themselves longing for sort of the rich historical experience that Europe, and particularly Italy, could offer. And this longing for distant, culturally rich destinations has translated into a fascination with Renaissance aesthetics. As travel resumed, the surge of visits to historic sites and European landmarks brought back a wave of inspiration. And we're now starting to see that inspiration from that initial people traveling is now coming out in completed designs. And this is leading just to a sort of a whole renewed appreciation for Renaissance design elements. So, pandemic aside, I think another important inspiration, just going quickly over these two slides here. This is a very, very recent home, recently featured in Architectural Digest in the US. I think it was in last month's issue. Again, you see this checkerboard floor. You can see it has more of a Gothic arch within the home. And these designers specifically said they were influenced by their recent travel to Europe. This is Tan France's house again, and he worked with a group called the Fox Group to design his house. And they also very explicitly said, very much influenced by recent travel to Europe. They were also noted that they were a bit more influenced by English Tudor homes as well. And then looking towards that minimalism side, I think there's this is another contributing factor as to why we're seeing sort of a Renaissance aesthetic now. It's a move away from minimalism. So the desire to break away from the sort of stark simplicity of minimalism has also played a role. The opulence and intricate detailing of Renaissance design offers a compelling contrast to modern minimalism. Designers and clients alike are drawn to the rich textures, ornate patterns, and historical grandeur that the Renaissance provides, seeking to infuse the spaces with a sense of depth and a sense of character. Here I have Architectural Digest cover from March of 2020. Very, very simplistic, sparse, minimal, compared to this January of 2024 cover of Architectural Digest. You can see the stucco work, even sort of starting to have the rounding of the windows, variety of textures and fabrics, and quite a difference in just a few years. Another role I see playing into why we're having this Renaissance resurgence now is the rise of social media and visual storytelling. There's definitely a rise in magazines, photographers, designers to use interior stylists and interior stylists as a creative directive, really trying to take those interior images and add a story and depth to them. Two very popular interior stylists we have right now are Michael Reynolds and Colin King. They both do a lot of work for Architectural Digest, and both of them I find harken back to really delving deep into providing more of a story. You see the books open here and with this older desk amongst this very beautiful wall mural, and Colin King as well here on the right. Social media has really amplified the amplified the appeal of historical design by allowing it visually creative storytelling. Homes styled with Renaissance influence create a narrative that stands out in the sea of all these contemporary interiors, and the ability to showcase historical pieces and design elements through pictures and posts attracts attention and engagement, making it a very valuable tool for designers and stylists to make a statement. And then another aspect, I think, why we're seeing a little bit of this Renaissance resurgence at the moment too would be mindfulness and sustainability. An encouraging aspect of this trend is its potential to align with mindfulness and sustainability. Renaissance-inspired design often incorporates antique and historical pieces rather than buying new items and promoting the reuse and preservation of existing furniture. This focus on repurposing and valuing historic items and artifacts reflects a broader awareness of climate change and environmental impact, suggesting a shift towards more sustainable design practices. I'm sure many of you have seen this before, of just people thrifting items and reusing and repurposing them in their home, and then using these items for display and really making sure that items are out a bit more on display, focusing on having those special pieces out, as we saw with some of the Renaissance paintings displaying those objects. So just in conclusions, a bit of a hopeful reflection. So amid our current climate crisis, a key lesson, as I was saying, of the Renaissance is the importance of cherishing and reusing what we have. Like the Renaissance people who value their antique possessions, we should strive to acquire less and honor the ones we already own. Our possessions should be well crafted, and our possessions should be treasured and displayed. really looking at the craftsmanship and honoring them and having it nicely displayed, reflecting the Renaissance ethos of valuing and preserving heritage as well. The major shifts of how people lived during the Renaissance, so with examples of such as separate rooms, greater use of objects for decor, a separate place setting for each guest, an overall appreciation for household goods and materials and objects, that continues today throughout the world. So that has started sort of back in the Renaissance, really focusing on that domesticity and displaying and honoring, and that continues today. And then this is a quote from Francesco Sansovino in 1561, and this is him speaking of Venice. And he says, "Nowhere else in Italy could one see buildings that are more comfortable, more inviting, and better equipped for human life than these." And I think that really rung true because of the way the interior was valued and cared for, and trying to bring it back to that idea of splendid and honoring that space. That has continued on till today. Okay, thank you very much.